Good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, October 16th. Welcome to RhiNews, where we cover interesting stories that the news cycle seems to be missing out on. Some of you may have noticed that there wasn't an episode of RhiNews last week, and many of you let out a collective cheer at that fact. But not to worry, I'm now back to collect your jeers, boos, and hisses in tonight's edition of RhiNews. Joining me tonight, I have the William and Lane to my Craig, Paul of Pelagia, and Shannon Q. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Best introduction ever.
I am excellent. How are you guys?
Pumped. We don't do stuff together that often, so this is fun.
No, we don't. I don't think I've had Paul on since my 10,000 subscriber celebration.
Oh my God, you're right. And yeah, I'm on your channel all the time.
I've been on Paul's channel a bunch. But...
Yeah. Yeah, there was that time we took over Paul's channel. That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. We should do that again sometime.
Yeah, maybe we will.
Anytime.
All right, so jumping into the news. Shannon, there's a fake psychologist running around Brooklyn treating children?
Yeah, it's okay. One of my things, I guess, that I really strongly advocate for is people seeking appropriate mental health services and understanding what is appropriate and is not appropriate and legitimate mental health care. Because there's a lot of loopholes that people can fall through and allow themselves to present as mental care professionals, even though they are not. So this is in Brooklyn, New York. There is a guy, or was a guy, whose name was Glenn Payne, or still is Glenn Payne, but he presented himself as a psychologist. He said he had legitimate credentials from the University of California, Los Angeles, and he had affiliations with Brooklyn hospitals and years of experience. So he had between 50 and 70 patients over the course of 6 years, between 2012 and I believe 2018.
6 years?
Yeah, six
6 years of medical fraud. So is this like Suits, but psychology?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So it was him and his girlfriend at the time. She posed essentially as his secretary, like his booking secretary. And 55 of the patients that he served were children who needed mental care help. One of them, and many of them were children in crisis. One of them was on probation because of their mental health issues resulting in them getting in some trouble. And this was mandatory mental health care. And he operated from 3 different offices, and he treated these patients consistently with no legitimate credentials. He did it. He lied about all his credentials and saw them over the course of 6 years. 6 years. He's being indicted on 55 counts of fraud.
55 counts. That's a lot of counts. So, now, is this like one of those white-collared crimes where he's probably going to get a slap on the wrist, pay a fine, do some house arrest, and be released again? Or is he actually facing some serious prison time?
Well, right now it looks like he's probably going to get upwards of a $30,000 fine. But if they can prove that he caused any severe emotional harm, he could get jail time. So he's held on between $100,000 and $50,000 bail bond right now, and he's remanded into custody, so he can't be released right now. So he actually is imprisoned at the moment, and these indictments are criminal charges.
I feel like prison time should be mandatory for something like this.
Yeah, you would think so, especially considering it's children, and not even if it wasn't children, these are vulnerable populations. And one of the reasons that I chose it is because there were several red flags that were overlooked by the people that pursued mental health treatment with him, because you can easily fake documents and credentials and present them. And a lot of people, if they see a diploma on the wall, that might be enough for them. But some red flags would have been when they were booking, he would only accept cash and email money transfers. That's a serious red flag. And in some instances, what caught on to him actually was there was a woman who had initially gone to see him, or with her child, I think, and she had asked the secretary, who was his girlfriend, the booking agent, if they could give them the insurance registration number. And he started to do cessation of counseling at that point in time. He was like, well, I can't really see you anymore. I'm actually really full right now. And you can't do it retroactively. So we can't book through insurance. And that is what spurred him actually getting caught for this. So I'd like to take the opportunity to have a little conversation about some of the things that you can and should do when you're seeking mental health help, to make sure that the person that you are going to see is accredited, licensed, professional, and qualified to provide you that type of assistance. Because if not, you could be putting yourself in a very, very dangerous situation with somebody who can make your mental health issues significantly worse.
I feel like it doesn't matter if it's mental health or any kind of health. If they'll only take cash, that's a bad sign.
Flag one,
no matter what.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. If they'll only take cash, if they won't provide an insurance number, you can also check their credentials. Like if they present you with credentials, like with a diploma of some sort, anybody who has a diploma, you'll be able to see them on the university website. Like you can look them up.
Yeah.
You can see the year they graduated, and you can see where they were in that class and whether they were in that class at all. Also, if you're a practicing mental health professional, you have to be registered with your accreditation agency in the state where you operate in the United States. So this was in New York. So there would be a psychology association that he would be registered with. If he was a counselor, there would be a counseling association that he would be registered with in order to be licensed to practice. Those are things that you need to take into account and really validate when you're looking into something like this. It's a shame that you have to, but you really, really, really do. You can't take for granted just because somebody has the office and the artifice of professionalism that they're telling you the truth.
So that's what I was going to ask. But what if they're wearing a white coat?
Oh, well,
like that's all fine then, right?
Yeah, it's
fine. White coat, you can't get those just anywhere.
No, God, no.
No,
Absolutely.
okay.
They're so hard to come by.
Good.
And if the diploma's in a fancy frame,
right,
then clearly,
obviously,
it's a legitimate one. That's how you can tell. If it's in a fancy frame,
only
you're in a lab
legit doctors can afford fancy framing.
I know, and a lab coat? I mean, come on. Come on, obviously. Yeah, it frustrates me because there's so many loopholes where people can, like the series that I did on Christian counseling, and I'm still kind of doing off and on Christian counseling, they have accrediting agencies, and the accrediting agencies are fake. So you really need to know what is a legitimate accrediting agency. Like you really need to be able to do your homework. And the first thing is make sure that they are who they say they are, and their education is from where they say. Well,
that's actually my question. So if this had been one of the Christian counselors you talk about, could they have been charged, or would they have been exonerated from this? No,
they wouldn't be charged because they fall into a loophole. The Christian counselors fall into a loophole because they're affiliated with a church.
Is that the RFRA thing? Where it's my sincerely held religious belief, therefore the law doesn't apply?
With the Christian counseling associations, it's because the word counseling, like the term counseling, has such a polysemous meaning, because you can be a counselor and you can counsel people on any number of things. Like I could be somebody who counsels you on how to do your taxes, right? Like I can be somebody who provides that type of counsel. They fall into that loophole because they're called counselors, and they fall into a secondary loophole, the Christian counselors, because they have a direct affiliation with the church. The church operates as an oversight committee, and they can say that they're spiritual counselors, even though they're presenting themselves as mental health professionals and advertise themselves as mental health professionals. They're advertising themselves as spiritual mental health guides as opposed to legitimate secular mental health guides. So you really need to look at the institution where these accreditations are from too, because there are people that fall into those loopholes that aren't appropriately educated but could present as though they are.
Now, I'm wondering if this is another one of those things that could be partially solved with socialized healthcare, because I know I recently had an experience with mental health professionals. We're still kind of dealing with this, but we didn't really.
That's obvious, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Stop it.
Yeah, but we didn't really get a choice in where we went. Like, we could pay for a private psychologist or whatnot, but if we wanted to go through the government, like there are channels that you go through, and these people don't get into these positions without having certain qualifications. Like, we went through a psychologist first who did the initial diagnosis, and then from there they determined the appropriate path of treatment.
Well, as Shannon said, it's kind of strange in the States. Like, as I lived in California for quite a while, and the very first thing you check anywhere you go is like, does my insurance line up with, like, there were doctors that even though I had great insurance down there were certain doctors I couldn't go to because they didn't take my insurance, or dental clinics or whatever. So it's strange that these people didn't check that first.
Okay, well, since we're talking about the economics of socialized healthcare, I will move on. There's a new report that was put out by the International Monetary Fund that basically confirms that trickle-down economics is a joke, essentially. So, yeah, I know, shocking. But as with so many things, like Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, the name trickle-down economics, it actually started as a derisive joke. They were just making fun of the idea. Because, realistically, who wants money to come to you in a trickle? Like, wouldn't you rather have a torrential downpour, like the Niagara Falls of money falling on your head? So, trickle-down economics, if you're not familiar, it's the idea that if you give business owners various incentives or tax breaks or whatnot, they will invest whatever money that they've saved as a result of these incentives back into the economy, and then a bigger piece of the economic pie will be available for everyone else. They'll create jobs, and it'll stimulate economic growth, and everybody will be better off if you give these already fairly well-off people extra money. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. A good analogy to think about to kind of help you understand why it doesn't work is picture someone's giving away $10 million, and they're only going to do it in one of two ways. The first option is to give $1,000 to 10,000 normal people, or option 2 is to give the entire $10 million to one already wealthy person. Now, which of these two options is going to be better for the economy? So in option 1, what normal person can't immediately think of exactly what they would do with an extra $1,000? So like, it actually, for most people, it wouldn't be enough. Like, for me, it would be a toss-up between getting my driveway paved or getting the roof of my garage redone. And it's not enough to cover either of those things by itself. Now, turn that around, you give that $10 million to one person who's already, say, a millionaire, and what do they do with it? Like, sure, yeah, they might use it to expand a business in a way that creates some jobs, but I can guarantee you that a good chunk of that money is going to sit in an investment account of some kind, possibly an offshore investment account that shelters them from taxes, something like that. But generally speaking, hoarding money like that does not create jobs or improve the economy. So the more money someone has when you plunk a large sum of money into their laps, the less likely that new money is to go to something that is actually beneficial to the working class people in the economy. Like, for instance, you take Jeff Bezos. Deposit an extra $10 million into his bank account right now, he probably won't even notice it. And so this report by the IMF has found that one of the best ways to increase a country's GDP is to focus on increasing the income of the bottom 20% of the income earners. Because they basically found that the larger the income inequality is in a nation, the lower the GDP of that nation tends to be. And in fact, it found that if you increase the income of the bottom 20% by just 1%, that will increase the GDP of that nation by about 0.38%, which doesn't sound like a heck of a lot, but if you consider the United States, their GDP is about $19 trillion. So that's an extra $73 billion in GDP. That's a lot of dollars. Wow. So
that'll make sense.
Yeah, you're just giving a little bit of extra money to a lot of people. They're going to spend that money because those are the people that need to spend the money. They don't have it all just sitting in a bank account waiting for a rainy day.
Which is going to bolster more businesses as opposed to just a few select businesses that are already successful.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if
prop
you
up
give
small businesses, create more jobs.
Yeah, it's like you give me that extra $1,000. I'm going to employ a roofer to redo the roof in my garage, and then he's going to have some of that money, which he will then use in whatever way he was, and it just it shuffles around. It's shuffle around economics rather than trickle down economics.
You just solve the world's problems, Rhino.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, shuffle around economics.
Who wouldn't rather shuffle than trickle? That's obvious.
Given those options.
And and this is unrelated to the article, but I know a little while ago, I think it was AOC proposed the 70% tax on any income over $10 million.
Right.
Now, I'm kind of baffled as to why anyone would be against that, unless there's someone that makes more than $10 million a year. Because, like, if you think about, like, you get to the point of $10 million in income per year, doesn't matter what the income bracket is before that, it's lower than 70%. Let's say it's 50%. You still have $5 million in your pocket. That is more money than most people will ever see in their entire lives. And then anything after that is just, it's gravy on top of gravy on top of gravy. So to take 70% of that away, the 30% that they're left with is still a ridiculously large sum of money. Like, we should not be feeling sorry for these people if we take 70% of their goofy large incomes and use them to, like, help pay for health care for people that need it and can't afford it. Like,
well, that's obviously a very socialist sounding thing to say.
It is.
And it sounds, and like, frankly, I get why 70% sounds scary when they're currently paying zero. Like, most people who make more than 10%. So, but I've seen similar studies where it's like, let's say it increased to like 2%. And I think that it was Bill Gates actually who had done a study on this, and don't quote me if that, but he was involved in some way, that that billionaires were willing to have their thing updated by 2%, and even that generated insane amounts of money. Let's walk our way into it. Sometimes we need to be a little bit pragmatic in terms of warming people up to ideas. But.
Yeah, I know that 70% is not going to pass as it is. But it's just like, I just don't understand why so many people that are never going to see that kind of money get so incensed at the idea of taxing people that can afford to pay the taxes.
Because maybe they project that one day they might be that person, or I don't know. It's really strange. People get enraged on behalf of the wealthy people when they're at such a massive disparity from them, and would be the ones being directly benefited by them paying more of their fair share, because so many of them hide money and have tax loopholes to not have to pay taxes on the money. And the average person, like, just from their payroll taxes alone, is paying a significant margin of their income. And once you get ridiculously wealthy, like, you can find many, many, many ways to hide it. So you're actually paying less tax than the average middle-class person.
Well, moving on. So, Paul, apparently Gary Glitter is not going to be earning royalties from his song being played in the Joker movie?
Apparently not. Movie. And so my former career, we used to be very entangled with movies, with theatrical release movies, as well as in the comic book industry. And my current interests are always about fake news and finding out what's true. So this is one of those rare occasions where all those things came together. So Joker, which opened a few weeks ago, and for those of you who don't follow movies, it opened to $96 million domestically, which is huge.
Wow.
And in part of that success was actually more than Justice League, embarrassingly enough.
I still haven't seen Justice League.
And there's probably no need if you haven't already. But but Joker's great, in my opinion. It's a great film if you're into that kind of dark, R-rated psychological stuff. But as always, Twitter is a place where people can be outraged about anything. The movie's opening up to some interesting conversations, but some of the conversations started being about a particular song in the film called Rock and Roll Part 2 by Gary Glitter from 1972. If you've seen the trailers and the TV spots, there's kind of this one scene that keeps showing over and again where Joker's in his full suit and he's going down this staircase. And during the film, Rock and Roll number 2 plays during that. And for those of you who don't know what that song is, that's kind of the Hey song. Da, 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 no, hey. And that's pretty much the whole song. Hopefully you're not copyright flagged.
Hey,
I tried to.
Well, now you have to pay Gary.
Yeah, now you're in trouble.
I am
Great.
personally paying Gary Glitter all sorts of money right now. No, I'm not. That was a joke.
So people on Twitter, of course, have endless time to be upset about things, and a number of people.
People are angry on
That's
Twitter.
not my experience.
So here's the. I know Shannon, this is going to be a shock.
Twitter and make them not angry anymore.
Some people on Twitter are angry at things that aren't you, Shannon.
That I don't understand how to process this information. Keep going while I think about what this means.
They started to get upset because Gary Glitter, who is the writer of this song and performer of this song, has been in some legal trouble and is currently in prison for assaults against young girls. If you're interested in learning more about what that is, you can go look that up. We don't need to go into the sort of details here. More of the point is that this is the type of individual that some of these people didn't feel should be associated with a film about a sociopathic murderer. Anyway.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. So, anyway, so of course, people on Twitter upset about this. Several newspapers, including The Sun in the UK, picked this up and reported pulling numbers apparently out of the air that he was going to be receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars for his role in the Joker film.
Oh,
and a whole week went along where people were publishing various stories about how he was getting all this money, and should any convicted criminal be getting money while they're from a film like this, and why would they do this? And of course, today I noticed that the Metro UK had to come up with an apology because no one bothered to call the rights companies or the film company to see if, in fact, Gary gets any money. So it turns out that in 1997, Universal bought the Gary Glitter catalog before he was convicted and before even the alleged incidents happened. They own outright this catalog. So since 1997, Gary has Mr. Glitter here has not received a single penny from his catalog. So it doesn't matter that it was in the Joker film. Only Universal received the royalty from inclusion in the Joker, not Mr. Glitter himself. So this is another one of those cases where the newspaper ran with angry people on Twitter and ran with it for a week until someone finally called one of the original sources to find out that there was really no story here to begin with.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it has just enough truth to it that it's believable, but it just doesn't end up being true. Like, because he wrote the song, it makes sense that the person who wrote the song is getting paid for it. He's still alive. You can get paid for stuff that you did previously outside when you're in prison, so it makes sense. Just need to
until you do any
piece.
Kind of checking.
Yeah, you just need to find that extra piece that he sold the rights to all his music like a couple decades ago.
So where did you even get so they made up a number out of the air though too?
Yeah,
because they couldn't have gotten the actual number, because in order to get the actual number, they would have had to trace who the royalties were going to, and that would have negated the entire thing. So that number, this is why people don't trust the friggin' media anymore. My God.
Yeah, so I feel this was a back of the envelope calculation that some guy did just with some known numbers from, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, which used all sorts of different music and paid royalties out for all of them. And they just kind of equated some of those numbers together and did some extrapolation, and it was like, oh, well, this must be how much he made as long as the industry standards were about the same.
Yeah, and of course the amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars was in the headline. It was nowhere in the article. I went and checked just before we came on air here. Even in that old article, so these are all, speaking of, the kind of yellow flags and red flags that Shannon was talking about before. When you see this kind of stuff in a news article, just if you can't drill down to what their source is, consider it suspect. But the other interesting part of this story for me, some of you may know that I wrote a comic series called Kaiser Soze, Scorched Earth. And if those of you who know the Kaiser Soze story, you know that that's a character played by Kevin Spacey. Now, in the middle of that comic run, Kevin Spacey, came to light of a number of things that he did in his past. And as a result, my comic series actually, even though it's all finished, hasn't finished being published because people didn't want Kaiser Soze on the shelf because of its association with Kevin Spacey. So it's just one of these interesting topics that also follows from this kind of story is what responsibility do we have in what kind of art we consume versus compared to the acts of the person who created the art. It should we be denouncing Joker for even using this film? Now it's a film that's set in the 70s, so it makes sense that this 70s song would be in it. But, was it irresponsible of Warner Brothers to include such a song in there? Or should we as a society be able to separate out the art from the performer, and to what extent? It's one of those. What do you guys think?
I think that's a gradient. Like, we don't have to completely divorce the art from the artist, but at the same time, I think we do have a bit of a responsibility. Like, if Gary Glitter was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from his song being used in this movie, then were I a producer of this movie, I would definitely be looking elsewhere for music. But I think because he no longer has the rights to it, then I would almost look at this as a slap in the face to him. Because he could have been making lots and lots of money had they used this, had he not been in prison, had he not sold the rights to it. But because all those things happened, he's just sitting there looking at what he could have had his life gone differently. So I think in this instance it's okay. But certainly there are some instances where I no longer want to consume the art from this person because of things that are so. Example of this is something that I'm a bit embarrassed to admit, but back when I was in high school, I was a huge Creed fan. I loved Creed. I know all their songs. I still follow the some of the guys from the band. They went off and formed Alter Bridge, and they've done some solo stuff. So I still follow some of their work, but Scott Stapp, the singer for Creed, when it came to light that he beat his wives when he was married, and he would constantly cheat on them while he was on tour. And there's an infamous Chicago concert where the term I recall being used was hopped up on goofballs, but I don't think that's something that's said anymore.
Wow.
That might be Willy Wonka movie. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that was what the news outlets were saying about it at the time. But there was a class action lawsuit from his fans that wanted their money back from that concert because it was he basically laid down on the stage and went to sleep in the middle of the concert and didn't finish it.
Good gig if you can get it.
Right.
Yeah, and so I still like the music. I know most people hate Creed is one of those bands that everybody loves to hate, almost like Nickelback.
Don't say their name. I will burn this place down, and I'm in my own house.
I know how much Shannon loves Chad Kroeger.
Oh, I'm gonna. I just puked in my mouth. I can't.
But yeah, that's how a lot of people feel about Creed. But for me, it's I would like to still like their songs, but now when I hear his voice, I picture a guy throwing an empty bottle of booze at his pregnant wife, and I can't enjoy that. So
right.
that's an instance where, and he's still making money from so if I play his songs on the Google Play Music Store, which is where I get most of my music from, he gets a little chunk of money from me. And last I heard, he had rehabilitated. I don't know. I don't really follow him anymore, but it's still because his voice brings that picture to my mind, I can't listen to their music anymore, even if I would still like it had I not known about that thing.
But would you feel let's say there was another fellow Creed fan who still enjoyed the music? Would you feel less of them? Would you think less of them? Are they being irresponsible to still enjoy the music?
I don't think so. I think it depends how they're enjoying it, because let's say
I guess if they already bought the CDs, then no more harm is done.
The last I heard, he had recovered. Maybe he relapsed again. I don't know. I'm not following it. But let's say hypothetically he is fully recovered, then fine. Go ahead, purchase their music. More power to you. If he had not recovered, if he's still having problems with beating his wives and girlfriends and whatnot, then I would say no, if you're listening in a way that they are going to be making money from you listening, on Google Play Music, then no. But sure, you have the CD, pop the CD in your CD player. What the heck are those things anymore?
Well,
Shannon, you're more nuanced than both of us. What can you enjoy art from an artist that you find distasteful?
I think it's situational. So back from what Rhino was saying, if if I know that this person is still engaging in these types of behaviors, like the things that we find reprehensible, and me purchasing music or art directly supports them and enables them to continue in their lifestyle, like, and they don't have any repercussions. I'm just giving money to somebody that I think is reprehensible, I won't do it. But I also believe that there should be a road to redemption too. So if somebody's like Rhino said, if there is a person that's recovered and is rehabilitated and their initial transgression wasn't something reprehensibly, incontrovertibly heinous, like I could maybe find a way, but it depends on what they did too. So if somebody, I'm trying to keep you monetized, so I don't want to say
I don't want to belabor this.
I don't want to say what they would have to do because that's guaranteed demonetization.
So there's one example I want to give you. So Michael Jackson, all his money goes to Sony. Any Michael Jackson album you buy now, their money goes to Sony. But is someone wrong for still enjoying Michael Jackson music, or should we be not ever enjoying Michael Jackson music ever again?
I don't think that you should use the word enjoy there, because you don't really have control over what you subjectively enjoy.
Continue to include in your streaming playlist, say.
I wouldn't.
But then this brings up the whole other question of like, how responsible are we for how we spend our, like you say, all the money now goes to Sony. Yeah. How responsible are we for finding out whether or not Sony is one of these companies that runs a sweatshop in China that employs child labor?
Right. Yeah.
Because regardless of whether it's Michael Jackson or someone else under the Sony label, that's where the money is going. It's all about being good stewards of our money and trying our best to spend our money ethically when reasonably possible, I think.
Yeah, when it's a person that's famous, I think we have more of a parasocial bond with those people, so it's more in our face, and we're more able to detach ourselves from the fact that a lot of the items that we purchase are, essentially made by slave labor, yet we do it anyway because we feel as though it's a necessity because of the way society is structured, whereas this is an instance where we have a little bit more control and can feel as though we are exercising some sort of integrity in that scenario, whereas otherwise we're a little bit more helpless to have that effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. Like with something like clothes, that's a necessity. You need to buy clothes, and it's hard to find ones that are made ethically sometimes. Yeah. Whereas with something like music, if you don't want to support Creed, you can go listen to something that's not Creed that's got a similar sound to it.
And you can see the effect taking place too. Like if a bunch of fans stop supporting an artist, you can see that you actually had an effect on affecting a behavioral outcome there, or this person had to feel repercussions because of their actions. Like you can actually see that happening. Whereas, we can't just stop wearing clothes, and it's a lot more difficult to go through every single item you purchase on a day-to-day basis and find out how it's like where it's sourced from and how it's constructed and where it came from and who made it.
We could just stop wearing clothes.
I'm sure you'd be fine with that. Like, wait a minute. We're Canadian. No, we can't. We'll die.
All he wears is a bow tie as it is. Don't take that away from him.
I can't tell. I'm really uncomfortable right now, actually. I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm glad you brought it up.
Now that we've done meta ethics for the entire planet, I'm sure your last story is going to be, much more very serious and a great topic to flow from there.
Yeah, absolutely. We are taking a frank look at female orgasms and rabbits.
That's sure. That's not a gear shift at all.
Well, no, this actually fits with the theme of the rest of the show, because the theme so far seems to be mostly like red flags about things. How to tell when something fishy is going on. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a great addition to that, because it's a fun little trek through the mess that science journalism can sometimes be. And this is actually the second time the Sun is coming up with regards to this sort of thing, because the Sun reported on this too, and they didn't do it accurately. So I guess that's not really surprising. They're not really a great journalistic source. But there's also Cosmos magazine, which I have trusted in the past, but I'm maybe
Cosmo or Cosmos?
Cosmos.
Oh, okay.
It is about orgasm, so that could go either way.
Exactly, right?
6 positions that will drive her wild.
Like rabbits.
So, according to The Sun and Cosmos magazine, scientists have finally figured out what evolutionary purpose is served by the female orgasm, which I don't think that's possible because female orgasms just don't exist, right?
Oh my.
It's a myth.
All right. Off air, we're going to have a chat. First, I'll have a chat with your wife, and I'll send her her apology card tomorrow.
I'm Mrs. Rhino.
I finish every time. That's the important thing, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll talk about this later. We're going to take this off air. That's
Okay. Okay, so back to the story. This is a good example of scientists latching onto a flashy headline that doesn't really have much substance to back it up. So the study that they were talking about administered an antidepressant that's known to suppress orgasms in women. They administered it to female rabbits for 2 weeks and then had them mate with a male named Frank. It was the same male mated with all the female rabbits, so lucky guy. And they measured ovulation in order to test the hypothesis that the female orgasm is an evolutionary leftover from a time when ovulation was triggered by sex rather than being cyclical. So rabbits are a species where they don't ovulate until they copulate. No ovulation till copulation. That's got a nice ring to it.
That's a mixed blessing.
That's an interesting slogan.
It's the rabbit sex ed slogan.
We didn't talk about that at the last meeting, so it must be a rabbit-only female sort of.
Yeah, so Judy Hopps is not interested right now. So there were a number of problems with the study. One of the main problems was that it was tiny, like minuscule. There were only 21 female rabbits and 1 male. And the females were divided up into 3 categories, with 9 rabbits in a control group that did not get any of the antidepressant, and the other 2 were split into groups that got differing doses of the antidepressant. Now, with such a small sample size, it's really impossible to rule out other potential confounding factors. Now, they did find there was a decrease in ovulation in the rabbits that had been dosed with the antidepressant, but I don't see anything in the paper describing how they might have accounted for different confounding factors. Like they did kind of account for weight, because this antidepressant is supposed to inhibit weight gain. So they actually fed the rabbits extra to counteract the inhibition of weight gain, and as a result, the control group rabbits gained more weight than the medicated rabbits. They said they accounted for that one. That didn't affect the results. There was no correlation between the weight and ovulation. But there are other things that they didn't necessarily account for, like they had the same male rabbit fertilizing all these female rabbits. Is there a decrease in his performance over time?
Right. Is it what about the afternoon rabbits versus the morning rabbits?
Yeah.
I have so many questions. How did they know each individual rabbit did or did not orgasm?
Well, the rabbits, they don't necessarily know whether or not they orgasmed, because it's really unknown if something like an orgasm exists in rabbits. So that's one of the hypotheses of the female orgasm in humans, is that it's a leftover from when we were, like, one of our ancestor species operated like the rabbits, where they would only ovulate after they had sex. And so that's one of the leading hypotheses for what the whole purposes of a female orgasm in humans. And so they're like, for a rabbit, it wouldn't necessarily be an orgasm in the same sense that it is for a human woman. It would just be after a certain amount of stimulation, ovulation happens. But they
carry on. I'm saying so many sentences that I never thought I'd say in my life. This is great. Like, how did you know the rabbit's orgasm? Said Shannon.
Well, I mean, They checked at the male orgasm every time with the vaginal swab, and checked for
typical
the leftovers. But yeah, they also didn't find any statistically significant results with their first run through when they ran the numbers. So it wasn't until they pooled a couple of groups of rabbits together that they ended up with a result that was statistically significant. And that is a huge red flag for what's called pee hacking. Now, that's not hacking the rabbit's penis. Oh, speaking of which, this...
Oh my God. What is my life? What's happening right now?
I promise whales do not show up anywhere in this story. But fun fact, this I forgot to mention at the beginning, this study was published in the journal PNAS. So that's my favorite journal.
I want to go home.
Sip your rum, Shannon.
Okay.
So in studies, they will often calculate a p-value for their study. So the p-value is the probability that the null hypothesis is true. So the null hypothesis is, so in this case, the hypothesis that they are presenting is that this drug will inhibit ovulation in the rabbits. So the null hypothesis would be that this drug has no effect on the ovulation of the rabbits. So the p-value is, and it's a value that assigns a probability that the null hypothesis is true. So if the p-value is greater, like if it's 0.05, then that means there's a 5% chance that in this case, the drugs had no effect on ovulation. So what they're looking for is they're looking for a p-value of under 0.05 or 5%. And that's generally what is considered statistically significant. But that's kind of a controversial topic in the scientific community because this emphasis on having statistical significance in p-values, especially that like there's nothing special about the number 0.05. That's just an arbitrary number that we chose. And it also kind of leaves the door open for p-hacking, which is looking at your results from different angles until you find a way to make it look statistically significant. So with statistics, as everybody knows, you can kind of massage them by looking at them in different ways or taking them from different angles, and you can find different numbers depending on how you do the calculations. So that's something that you want to look for when you're reading through studies. So in this case, so there was a paragraph in the study where they basically state that given that they were both statistically indistinguishable, they then pooled the control group and the treatment groups in order to obtain a higher p-value, or sorry, lower p-value. So they don't come out and say that they did it specifically for the p-value, but that's what it looks like. So that's one of the red flags you can look for, is if they are not evaluating things in the way that they laid out at the beginning of their study. Like if they're changing their methodology in the middle, then that's kind of a red flag for p-hacking. And also in just a small group like this, the chances of it just being random noise are much higher than if you have with statistics, the more samples you have, the bigger the sample size, the more it'll kind of even out. So it's just this tiny little sample size of 21 rabbits. It's much more likely that it's just some anomaly that they weren't able to account for. But after they pooled the groups together, they calculated a p-value of 0.009, which is generally considered quite significant. So that's a less than 1% chance that the null hypothesis is true. But like I said, there are a lot of red flags for p-hacking. And on top of that, like there's just all sorts of things wrong with the study. And in fact, in the Discovery Science article that I read on it, they expressed surprise that a journal as prestigious as PNAS would actually publish this paper. And yes, as silly as their name sounds, they actually are a very reputable journal. I always giggle a little bit when I run across them in my research for my regular videos. But they are one of the most reputable journals out there. So the fact that they would publish a study that just has obvious signs of p-hacking is just, I don't know.
Yeah, they're like BuzzFeed though. You know, if they're looking for clickbait and if they see female rabbit orgasms, they know people are going to click on that. So you got to publish it.
Well, that's Sun and Cosmos were like the BuzzFeed. Where it's PNAS, the journal themselves.
Oh no, I'm saying PNAS is slipping.
Oh, are they?
Or there could be another reason.
What?
It could be that they see it as an initial study. Like they could understand that there's some issues with the data, but also it could be kind of like a first of its kind sort of study that they see as maybe a precedent set that requires further research towards the same vein to see if there's any sort of reproducibility, and they need it to be able to be available for citation lists. So it could be in for that reason, but people don't like when they see a study in a paper or in a journal, in a reputable journal, people have this idea in their head sometimes that, oh, okay, that means that that's kind of like the final word on this topic, rather than seeing science as more so of an ongoing conversation. And some of these studies could have like really extemporaneous variables that aren't controlled for, but the fact that they found anything at all is kind of interesting. It's worth putting on note on the record so that another person can come along and try to reproduce that study and find out whether it has any efficacy or not. So this one clearly had a lot of serious holes, but maybe is worth just, putting down on the docket because the potential results are interesting and they want future research to be done. Well,
that is still one of the leading hypotheses as to what the purpose of the female orgasm is. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's actually one of the, because P results, the P values of 5% are considered significant. That's actually one of the main reasons we need replication, is because that's actually 5% is huge. Like if there's a 5% chance that your study could be completely wrong, that's huge. Like that's not really statistically significant in your favor.
Right.
That's just the arbitrary number that you chose. But if you do 20 studies on the same thing and only one of them comes out as having the null hypothesis be true, the rest of them have the study's hypothesis work out for them, then that's exactly what you would expect with a p-value 0.05 or 5%.
Yeah. Right. I've criticized creation scientists on this several times. Is like, for example, in carbon, not carbon dating, but in radioactive dating, it's easy to find 5% of the values that are clearly outliers.
Yeah,
but I point those kind of things out in my video as you do in yours, and a 5% outlier lets them cause doubt in people's mind when you're right. It's an arbitrary number that probably shouldn't.
They're way worse though. These guys were at least transparent about it. Like which one was the one, the human chimp DNA, the chromosome 2 fusion, where they came up to 70%? Because they used an antiquated version of the data processor and left entire base pairs out.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but even 70% is a ridiculously large number to have in common with apes if we're supposed to be a special created species all on our own.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. But their point, like when they do crap like that, is to just cast doubt on the field, on any scientific field in general, so that people can feel justified to have a reasonable disbelief in the results of many fields, culminating fields of study.
Right. So the lesson is, if you're planning to make any life changes based on rabbit orgasms, maybe hold off. Until more data.
And just one final note, and then we'll close out the headlines for the evening. In this study, there is a hand drawing of 2 rabbits having sex. So that was someone's job in this, was to draw 2 rabbits.
Well, now we know how it ended up on here and caught your eye.
I was looking for rhinos, okay? I was looking for rhinos. Yes, all coming together. The male rabbits, the female rabbits.
Oh my God. I'm going to go home now.
Okay.
But I've been through enough today.
Okay, that's it for news items. Now it's time for the history lesson of the day. We're ending on a cheery note today. On this day in 1793, Marie Antoinette was beheaded. So that's exciting. So actually, fun fact.
That's exciting.
Okay, so aside from everybody knows she didn't really say "let them eat cake." That was a journalistic exaggeration. Before her execution, she was actually nicknamed by the French people Madame Deficit, or Madame Deficit, Mrs. Deficit, because of her extravagant tastes and lavish lifestyle. So because of that, I suggest that we nickname Trump Monsieur Deficit.
Marie Antoinette believed in the trickle-down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
She did.
We'll see how that worked out for the French.
Yeah.
They loved it. Everybody was really well off.
All right, so
a lot of heads trickled down.
Oh God.
Let's make sure that the CIA and the Secret Service doesn't have to listen to this. So don't draw any more
I was not advocating for the beheading of Donald Trump. Just to make that clear.
Okay. Well, now we know. I was on the fence about what you thought about that, but now I'm very glad that you explicitly stated
I'm
it.
in favor of impeachment or voting him out. I am nonviolent.
Yeah, I think he needs to go. But just don't send him here. He can't come here. Don't let him come here.
Send him to Mexico.
Revoke his passport. Oh my God, could you imagine? That would be great.
All right, so that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me, guys.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. This is fun.
All right. Have a good week.
I will.
I'll record a better ending to that later.
Have a good week.
Have a good.
Try not to have a sucky week.
Yeah.